Before the Second World War, there was almost no aircraft industry in Canada.
Cancar was a firm that began in 1912 as a place to make boxcars.
The management of Cancar decided that the future was in aviation.
Canadian Car and Foundry had never manufactured a single aircraft in its existence. It had a plant in Fort William, which is today Thunder Bay in Ontario. In 1937, against all odds, Canadian Car and Foundry got a contract from the US Navy to produce a very modern biplane, the FF-1.
It was all on a very small scale, and they never got much past about 200 people working here.
A monumental move was made in 1938, when Canadian Car and Foundry hired the world's first female aircraft designer. With war looming in Europe, her first task was the design of the Maple Leaf II.
As World War II actually began, people recognized that they were going to need thousands, if not tens of thousands, of fighter airplanes.
The government in London decided to look elsewhere where they could mass produce this airplane. They gave Canada a contract of 40 Hawker Hurricane in November 1938.
One of the reasons why they picked Fort William was because they felt it was a long way away from possible enemy fire. They made heavy work out of that.
It represented quite a shift in their production capabilities to turn out an airplane.
A huge increase in staff. If you just consider the implications when you suddenly go from a workforce of 300 to 6,700, there was always some work being done 24 hours a day. At the height of production, they were producing about 30 Hurricanes every week.
Overseeing this production was Chief Aeronautical Engineer Elsie McGill.
The Hawker Hurricane was built very much on a production line or an assembly line kind of process, of course pioneered by Ford.
They designed a conveyor track system where airplanes were put on a small carriage and they moved along by themselves on the assembly line.
Once the airplanes were built, they were shipped back to England inside these large crates.
When war broke out, one of the issues, of course, was the fact that the men were going into the forces, and they gradually began to employ more and more women.
It was just a total shift in terms of how people saw what women should be doing or could be doing. At its height, in 1944, there were about 2,700 women out of 6,700 working at the plant.
When they built them, they all had to be tested. In 1941, they had problems with engines. They couldn't get enough engines. So what they did was they had spare engines at the plant. So when they built a Hurricane, they put an engine in it, test flew it, took the engine out, put in another one and flew that.
So a lot of the production bugs had already been taken care of. We got the full drawings and everything else. So we had a jump start that way. On the other hand, we ourselves developed a number of improvements that hadn't yet even been done in England. For example, they ended up having all metal wings, whereas in Britain, they were still fabric-covered planes. They were actually rather surprised that things had gotten that advanced. I think there was a real tendency to underestimate the technical sophistication of the people who were building the planes here.
At the end of the year 1942, 1,451 Canadian Hurricanes had been built, and in the spring of 1943, the contracts were finished and the production stopped. Canadian Car and Foundry moved to another aircraft, this time an American design for the US Navy, the SB-2C Helldiver, a dive bomber that would be used in the Pacific.
Canadian aircraft production at the time of World War II and for quite a few years afterwards moved ahead at a tremendous pace.
At the end of the Second World War, Cancar moved seamlessly from building airplanes to building buses. There was, of course, a huge reduction in staff. Virtually every city in Canada ended up getting buses from Fort William.
The fact that there are these aircraft that are being preserved now that came from Cancar, I can see that as a tribute to the good work that the people did.